They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when your own blood poisons you? I'm about to tell you a story that sounds impossible until you realize it's happening in families everywhere, hidden behind perfect smiles and expensive wedding photos. My name is Kimberly Morrison, and I spent 3 years saving $15,000 to prove I deserved to exist in my own family. I couldn't believe what I was walking into when I arrived at my sister's $300,000 wedding in Beverly Hills. The truth is, I thought if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, loved hard enough, they'd finally see me. I was wrong. What happened next exposed a conspiracy so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that even strangers stepped in to call it what it was. Betrayal wrapped in champagne silk and diamond-studded lies. This isn't just about a wedding that went wrong. It's about the moment I stopped being the scapegoat and became the person who walked away with her dignity intact. My parents handed me a gray badge at the entrance, limited access guest, while everyone else wore gold. My own sister's wedding, and I wasn't allowed to eat, wasn't permitted in the reception, wasn't even supposed to exist beyond handing over my envelope and disappearing like a shameful secret they'd rather forget. But here's what they didn't plan for. I had receipts. I had proof. And when I walked to that gift table and took my money back in front of hundreds of guests, I didn't just reclaim $15,000. I reclaimed every piece of myself I'd given away trying to earn love that should have been free. The shocking part isn't that they humiliated me, it's that they genuinely believed I'd accept it, thank them for it, and keep paying for the privilege. Then something happened that changed everything. A woman I'd never met, someone with the social power my parents desperately craved, witnessed the whole thing and said what everyone was thinking, but nobody dared to speak. You should be ashamed. This story isn't about revenge. Though believe me, that crossed my mind. It's about what happens when you finally see the pattern, when you stop making excuses for people who've been writing you out of the family photo for decades. It's about the moment you realize that karma isn't something that happens to bad people eventually. Sometimes, it's something you deliver yourself by refusing to play a rigged game. I was lied to, cheated out of basic dignity, and backstabbed by the people who were supposed to protect me. But I walked out of that estate with something they couldn't take: my self-worth, my savings, and the absolute certainty that I'd rather have no family than one that treats me like an ATM with a gray badge. What came next? The phone calls, the guilt trips, the desperate attempts to pull me back into their dysfunction, proved everything I'd suspected about who they really were. And what I did with that $15,000? That's where this story gets good. I couldn't believe what I was holding in my hands. There I was, standing at the entrance of the Ashford estate in Beverly Hills, wearing the dress I'd saved for months to buy, and they handed me a gray badge that said, "Limited Access Guest." My sister Natalie's wedding was supposed to be this golden moment, this dream celebration where maybe, just maybe, I'd finally feel like I belonged. But the security guard looked at me like I was a stranger crashing the party, not the bride's own sister. My mother stood 15 feet away, pretending she didn't see me, her champagne glass catching the afternoon light while my hands trembled around that cheap plastic badge. The woman at the check-in table cleared her throat and pointed to a laminated sheet. "Gray badges aren't permitted in the main reception hall or the dining pavilion," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed. Then she held out her hand expectantly. "But all gifts must be placed on the table at arrival. I'll need your envelope now." I felt my face burn with humiliation as other guests walked past me, friends of the family I'd known since childhood, flashing their gold and silver badges like VIP passes to a concert while breezing through with their gifts still in hand. This wasn't just about seating arrangements or some mix-up with the guest list. This was deliberate, calculated, and everyone around me could feel the betrayal hanging in the air like expensive perfume gone sour. I wanted to turn around and leave right then, but I couldn't. Inside my purse was an envelope containing a cashier's check for $15,000. I'd converted my savings account into that single check just 2 days ago because I wanted it to feel serious enough for them, official enough to prove my worth. 3 years of side hustles, overtime shifts, and saying no to every single thing I wanted for myself, all compressed into one cream-colored envelope. I'd convinced myself that this gift would finally prove something, that maybe if I showed up with enough generosity, enough sacrifice, they'd see me as worthy. The truth is, I'd been chasing their approval my whole life, and this wedding felt like my last chance to buy my way into the family I was born into, but never truly invited to join. My phone buzzed in my clutch just as I was about to hand over the envelope, and I saw a text from someone I didn't recognize. Don't give them the money. They planned this. Check the seating chart. Your name was crossed out last week. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake or an oversight. This was a setup, a carefully orchestrated performance where I was cast as the embarrassment they'd rather hide. Revenge wasn't even on my mind yet. I was still trying to process the shocking reality that my own mother had engineered my exclusion while still expecting me to hand over that envelope. But the check-in woman was staring at me, hands still outstretched, and I could feel my mother's eyes on me from across the courtyard. So I did what I'd always done. I complied. I handed over my envelope, watched her place it on a silver tray, and felt a piece of my soul go with it. I walked through those mansion doors anyway, gray badge clipped to my dress like a scarlet letter. The estate was drowning in white roses and crystal chandeliers, and everywhere I looked, I saw the life my family had built without me. The golden child's fairy tale where I was nothing but a footnote they'd rather erase. Guests whispered and glanced my way, and I knew they were wondering why the bride's sister was wearing a badge that screamed, "You don't belong here." But I held my head up, even though my envelope was already gone, because something inside me was starting to shift from shame to something sharper, something that tasted like justice waiting to be served. The main pavilion was off limits to me, but I could see inside through the floor-to-ceiling windows, my sister Natalie in her custom Vera Wang gown, my parents glowing with pride, the whole scene looking like a magazine spread celebrating a family that had conveniently backstabbed the daughter who'd never fit their perfect image. I stood outside that glass wall, watching my own blood pretend I didn't exist, and that's when I realized they wanted the gift, but they didn't want me. They wanted my money, my validation, my continued role as the scapegoat who'd quietly accept whatever scraps they threw. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They underestimated what happens when you push someone past humiliation and straight into clarity. Let me tell you about those $15,000, because they weren't just money. They were 3 years of my life compressed into that cashier's check. 3 years of working double shifts at the hospital, taking on every extra project my boss offered, selling things I loved on Facebook Marketplace, and living in a studio apartment that barely had heat in winter. I told myself it was temporary, that once Natalie saw how much I was willing to sacrifice, she'd finally see me as a real sister. I lied to myself every single day, convincing my reflection in the mirror that love could be purchased if the price was high enough. Every time I deposited money into that savings account, I felt this twisted sense of pride mixed with desperation. $200 here, $500 there. I tracked every penny in a notebook like it was some kind of sacred mission. My coworkers thought I was saving for a house or a dream vacation, but the truth was so much sadder. I was saving to prove my self-worth to people who'd decided I had none. I skipped my best friend's destination bachelorette party because I couldn't afford the flight. I wore the same 3 outfits to work for months. I said no to dates, to concerts, to every small joy that makes life worth living, all because I believed this gift would be my golden ticket into their world. The worst part? My mother knew. She'd called me 6 months before the wedding, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she uses when she wants something. "Natalie's been so stressed about the wedding costs," she said, like she was sharing a confidence between mother and daughter. "It would mean so much if you could contribute something meaningful." The word meaningful hit different when you realize it was code for expensive enough to justify your existence. I told her I was working on something special, and I could practically hear her calculating the number through the phone. already planning how to take credit for my sacrifice while keeping me at arm's length. I remember the exact moment I hit $15,000. It was a Tuesday night in March, after I'd gotten my annual bonus. I sat on my apartment floor and cried, not from joy, but from this hollow feeling that I couldn't name yet. Part of me knew I was making a terrible mistake, that I was feeding a pattern that had been destroying me since childhood. But the other part, the part that still desperately wanted to belong, whispered that maybe this time would be different. Maybe if I gave enough, loved enough, proved enough, they'd finally make room for me at their table instead of leaving me to starve outside. What they didn't know, what I barely admitted to myself, was that this money represented every moment I'd felt invisible in my own family. It was the birthday parties where my cake was an afterthought, the graduations where they showed up late or not at all, the Christmases where Natalie's pile of presents towered over my single gift like a monument to their priorities. I thought if I could just match their financial language, speak in the currency they valued most, they'd finally hear me. The infidelity wasn't romantic. It was familial, a betrayal of the most basic contract between parents and children, that you'll be loved without having to earn it. On Friday before the wedding, I went to the bank and converted everything into a cashier's check. I wanted it to feel official, weighty, impossible to dismiss as just money. I carried that envelope to Beverly Hills like it was made of glass, knowing that inside was more than a check. It was my dignity, my hope, and my last attempt at belonging. I'd rehearsed the moment 100 times. I'd hand it to her. She'd open it. Her eyes would widen with gratitude, and maybe, just maybe, she'd hug me like she meant it. I'd fantasized about my parents seeing the amount, and finally understanding that I wasn't the failure they'd written me off as. But as I stood there with that gray badge marking me as less than, forced to surrender my envelope at check-in like some kind of security protocol, I started to wonder if I'd been financing my own humiliation all along, paying for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. This wasn't the first time I'd been erased. It was just the most expensive production of a show that had been running my entire life. Growing up, Natalie was the star everyone gathered to watch, and I was the stagehand they forgot to put in the program. She got piano lessons with a teacher who'd trained at Juilliard while I got a $20 keyboard from a garage sale. She had her college tuition paid in full at Stanford while I worked 3 jobs to afford community college, and still graduated with debt that's choking me to this day. The family drama wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, systematic, a slow betrayal that happened in 1,000 tiny moments that added up to a childhood spent wondering what was wrong with me. I remember being 12 years old, standing in our living room while my parents hung new family photos on the wall. There was Natalie at her dance recital, Natalie winning the spelling bee, Natalie smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower on a trip I wasn't invited to because someone needed to stay with Grandma. But here's what still makes my chest tight. In the few photos where I did appear, I'd been physically cut out or cropped so aggressively that you could only see half my face, like I was photobombing my own family. My mother said it was about composition and aesthetic. But even at 12, I knew the truth. I didn't fit the image they wanted to project to the world. The pattern was so consistent, it became my normal. Natalie's birthday parties had guest lists of 50 kids, rented ponies, and custom cakes from the fancy bakery downtown. Mine had pizza, and whoever my parents could guilt into showing up, usually celebrated a week late because it conflicted with Natalie's schedule. When Natalie got backstabbed by her high school boyfriend, my parents took her to therapy and on a healing trip to Hawaii. When I went through my worst breakup at 19, my mother told me to stop being dramatic and that boys come and go. The message was clear. Natalie's pain mattered, mine was an inconvenience. Every family holiday was a masterclass in being invisible while standing right in front of people. Christmas morning meant watching Natalie open gifts for an hour while I got a sweater and maybe a gift card, always with my mother's commentary about not spoiling kids who don't appreciate things. Thanksgiving meant I was assigned dish duty while Natalie held court at the table, telling stories about her internship or her boyfriend's family yacht. I couldn't believe how seamlessly they operated without ever acknowledging the disparity, like they'd all agreed to participate in this collective lie where treating your children completely differently was somehow normal and justified. The worst part wasn't the material stuff. It was the emotional abandonment dressed up as tough love. When I got accepted to nursing school, my mother's response was, "Well, at least you found something you're capable of," while Natalie's acceptance to business school got a dinner party with 50 guests. When I bought my first car, a used Honda I'd saved for 2 years to afford, my father said, "Try not to wreck it." But when Natalie got a brand new Audi for graduation, he posted about it on Facebook like he'd personally built it with his bare hands. They didn't just prefer her. They actively humiliated me in the process of elevating her, making sure I knew exactly where I stood in their hierarchy. I spent years trying to decode what I'd done wrong, what crime I'd committed to deserve being the family scapegoat. I was the good kid. I didn't drink, didn't party, didn't cause trouble. But that somehow made it worse because they couldn't even justify their treatment with, "She's difficult," or "She needs tough love." The truth was simpler and more shocking. Natalie fit their vision of success, and I didn't. And in their world, that was reason enough to withhold love, investment, and basic recognition. So I learned to perform, to overcompensate, to bring gifts and smile through the shame, always hoping that one day I'd do enough to earn what Natalie got just for existing. This wedding was supposed to be my final performance, my grand gesture that would rewrite the script. But standing there with that gray badge, I realized I'd been rehearsing for a part that was never actually available to me. That text message sat on my screen like a bomb waiting to explode, and my hands shook as I read it again. "Don't give them the money. They planned this. Check the seating chart. Your name was crossed out last week." The sender identified herself as Sophie, one of the wedding coordinators who'd apparently grown a conscience. She attached a photo, and when I opened it, I felt my entire body go cold. There was the seating chart for the reception, a beautiful calligraphy masterpiece on cream cardstock, and my name, Kimberly Morrison, had been physically crossed out with a thick black marker, with a note in my mother's handwriting. Gray badge, no meal service, no reception access. I zoomed in on that photo until my eyes burned, studying every detail like it was evidence in a crime scene, which, honestly, it was. This wasn't some last-minute oversight or a vendor mistake. This was premeditated exclusion, carefully orchestrated by the woman who gave birth to me. Sophie sent another message. "Your mom sent an email to the catering manager 2 weeks ago specifically requesting that gray badge holders not be served dinner. She said it was budget constraints, but everyone knows the wedding cost over $300,000. I'm sorry. This felt wrong. I'm documenting this for myself, too. Your mom's emails are not okay." The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, it was in how calculated it was, how much effort they'd put into humiliating me while still expecting me to show up and play along. My phone kept buzzing with more messages from Sophie, each one revealing another layer of this conspiracy. There were screenshots of email threads where my mother discussed managing Kimberly's expectations and keeping her away from important guests. One email literally said, "We can't have her embarrassing Natalie in front of Maxwell's family. Give her limited access and she'll stay out of sight." I felt sick reading it, not just from the cruelty but from the casual tone, like they were discussing pest control rather than a human being. The word vengeance started forming in my mind, not as a violent impulse, but as a quiet recognition that something had to shift, that I couldn't keep accepting this treatment and calling it love. What really broke me was the financial calculation behind it all. Sophie sent me a photo of a text exchange between my mother and Natalie from 3 months ago. Natalie had written, "Is Kimberly really contributing? Because if she is, we can upgrade the champagne selection." My mother responded, "She's giving at least $10,000. I told her how much it would mean to you. She's desperate to feel included. We might as well benefit from it." I read that message 5 times, each time feeling more stupid for not seeing what was so obvious. They'd played me like a slot machine, knowing exactly which buttons to push to get me to pay out, and they'd been laughing about it the whole time. The evidence kept piling up in my phone like a prosecution's dream case. Sophie explained that she'd overheard my mother coaching the security team. If Kimberly tries to enter the main pavilion, redirect her politely but firmly. We don't need a scene. There were photos of the gift table with specific instructions that my envelope should be secured immediately upon arrival and placed in my parents' personal safe, not with the other gifts. They weren't just excluding me. They were ensuring they got paid for the privilege of doing so. The infidelity of it all wasn't romantic cheating. It was something worse, the systematic exploitation of someone's love and loyalty for profit, knowing the victim would probably thank you for it. I stood there in the courtyard of that estate, designer landscaping surrounding me while my entire reality crumbled, and something fundamental shifted inside my chest. This wasn't about bad communication or different love languages or any of the therapy speak I'd used to rationalize their behavior for years. This was about people who saw me as a resource to extract value from, not a daughter or sister to cherish. Sophie's final message said, "I know I shouldn't get involved, but I have a sister too, and if someone did this to her, I'd want her to know. You deserve better than this." And she was right. The truth was shocking, brutal, and absolutely undeniable. And for the first time in my life, I had receipts to prove I wasn't crazy, wasn't oversensitive, wasn't imagining the karma that was about to come full circle. The Ashford estate was a monument to excess, and every corner of it screamed the kind of wealth that my family wanted everyone to associate with their name. Everyone could attend the ceremony. That was outdoors, impossible to gatekeep completely. But the badge colors controlled everything after. Gold badge holders glided into the main pavilion where ice sculptures shaped like swans sat on tables draped in silk, where a live orchestra played classical music that probably cost more than my annual rent. Silver badge holders got access to the garden reception with the open bar, and past appetizers that looked like tiny works of art. And then there was me. Gray badge clipped to my dress like a warning label, relegated to the outer courtyard where a few folding chairs and a cash bar had been set up for the limited guests, mostly +1s of distant cousins and vendors waiting for their shifts to start. I watched the hierarchy play out in real time. This brutal social experiment where your worth was literally color-coded and displayed for everyone to judge. A waiter walked past me carrying a tray of champagne, saw my gray badge, and kept walking without even making eye contact. Another guest, someone I recognized from Natalie's college days, started to wave at me, then noticed my badge and suddenly pretended to be fascinated by her phone. The humiliation wasn't just about being excluded. It was about being marked, identified, othered in front of hundreds of people who would now forever associate me with whatever shameful category limited access implied. My mother had turned my exclusion into a spectator sport and she'd sold tickets. I saw her before she saw me. My mother in her custom rose gold gown, holding court near the pavilion entrance, accepting compliments about the wedding like she'd personally architected every detail. When our eyes finally met, her face did this thing I'd seen 1,000 times. A micro-expression of annoyance quickly smoothed into a tight smile. She excused herself from her group and walked toward me with the purposeful stride of someone about to handle an inconvenient situation. "Kimberly," she said, my name coming out like a sigh. "I'm glad you made it. Why don't you stay out here where it's quieter? The ceremony starts soon and we don't want any complications." "Complications?" I repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what you're calling me now?" Her eyes hardened, but she kept that smile plastered on for the guests who might be watching. "Don't be dramatic. This is Natalie's day, and I won't have you making it about yourself." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a second I almost fell for it, almost believed that wanting basic recognition at my own sister's wedding was somehow selfish. "I already gave you the gift," I said quietly, and I watched something flicker in her eyes. Relief. Satisfaction. The look of someone who just confirmed their investment paid off. "How generous," she said, the words dripping with false gratitude. Now, Kimberly, please, stay where you're supposed to be. We can't have you wandering around causing scenes." The ceremony itself was a blur of white roses and string quartets, and I watched from my assigned position at the very back of the outdoor seating area, so far from the altar that I could barely see Natalie's face. My parents sat in the front row, my father dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief, my mother beaming with pride, and the empty seat next to them, the one that should have been mine, had been filled with one of Maxwell's aunts. They'd literally replaced me in the family tableau, and no one seemed to notice or care except me. I couldn't believe I was watching my only sister get married while being treated like an uninvited party crasher. But the evidence was right there in the seating chart, in the badge system, in every detail they'd designed to remind me I didn't belong. After the ceremony, the real performance began. Guests migrated to their designated areas based on badge color, and I watched my family float through the estate like celebrities, stopping for photos and air kisses while completely avoiding the section where I stood. Natalie's laugh carried across the garden, high and delighted, and I wondered if she even knew I was there. My father walked past me twice without acknowledgement, and when my cousin tried to come talk to me, my mother literally intercepted her and redirected her toward the main pavilion. They were treating me like a shameful secret, something to be managed and contained, and the saddest part was how good they were at it. Like they'd been practicing this particular kind of family betrayal for years. My envelope was already in their possession, my money already claimed, and I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could accept this treatment and let them keep what they'd taken, or I could do something that would change everything. The choice was becoming clearer with every minute they pretended I didn't exist. The gift table sat in the main pavilion like a shrine to excess. Crystal vases, silver picture frames, envelopes bulging with checks and cash, all displayed on a table draped in champagne-colored silk, with a security guard stationed nearby. I'd been staring at it for 20 minutes from my position outside the glass doors, watching other guests admire the display, and something inside me finally snapped. This wasn't nervousness or anger. It was clarity, cold and sharp as a surgical blade. I could see my cream-colored envelope sitting there, my careful calligraphy visible even from this distance, and I realized they'd taken it from me the moment I arrived, but it was still mine. I straightened my shoulders and walked straight toward those doors like I had every right to be there. Because the truth was, I did. The security guard moved to intercept me, his hand already reaching for his radio. But I didn't stop walking. "I need to adjust my gift," I said, my voice steady despite my heart trying to break through my ribs. He looked at my gray badge, then at the gift table, clearly torn between his instructions and basic human decency. "Ma'am, limited access guests aren't permitted." "I'm the bride's sister," I interrupted, letting each word land like a gavel. "And I'm getting my envelope back." I didn't wait for permission. I walked past him, and maybe it was the conviction in my voice, or maybe he just didn't get paid enough to wrestle someone's sister, but he let me through. The pavilion went quiet as I approached that table, hundreds of eyes suddenly tracking my movement like I was an intruder at a museum, which, I guess in their world, I was. I found my envelope easily, cream-colored with Natalie and Maxwell, written in my careful handwriting, exactly where they'd placed it after confiscating it at check-in. My hands didn't shake as I picked it up. I heard the whispers start immediately, that particular frequency of wealthy people scandalized by someone breaking their unspoken rules. Then I heard her, my mother's voice cutting through the crowd like a knife. "Kimberly, what are you doing?" She was moving toward me fast, my father right behind her, both of their faces frozen in that particular expression of panic mixed with rage that comes from losing control of a narrative they'd spent years crafting. "I'm reclaiming my dignity," I said, loud enough for the guests nearby to hear. My mother reached for the envelope, but I pulled it back. "You don't get to humiliate me and take my money too. You don't get both." Her face went through several expressions: shock, anger, calculation, before settling on a strained smile. "You're making a scene," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Over a misunderstanding about seating arrangements. Don't be childish. That word, childish, had been her favorite weapon my entire life, used to dismiss every legitimate hurt I'd ever expressed. But this time, I had something she didn't expect. Evidence. I pulled out my phone with my free hand, opened the photos Sophie had sent me, and held them up. "Is this a misunderstanding?" I asked, showing her the seating chart with my name crossed out. "Or this?" I swiped to the email about keeping me away from important guests. "Or this?" The text messages about using my desperation to upgrade the champagne. My mother's face went white, then red, and I watched something crack in her carefully maintained facade. My father tried to grab my phone, but I stepped back. "I have more," I said, my voice carrying now, addressing not just them, but everyone within earshot. "I have proof that you planned this whole thing. The gray badge, no meal service, exclusion from the reception, forcing me to hand over my envelope at check-in so you could secure the money before I realized what you'd done. You wanted payback for the crime of existing, and you wanted to get paid for it." The silence in that pavilion was deafening, broken only by the string quartet playing on, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Guests were openly staring now, phones probably recording, and I could see my mother doing the math, realizing that her reputation, the thing she valued most in the world, was crumbling in real time. "You plan to take my money and treat me like I was nothing," I continued, and I felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. "You exploited my love, my loyalty, my desperate need to belong to a family that backstabbed me at every turn. But here's what you didn't plan for. I'm done paying for the privilege of being humiliated. I'm done financing my own erasure." I clutched that envelope to my chest like it was my heart I was taking back, and in a way, it was. This money represents every time I chose you over myself, and I'm not making that choice anymore. The confrontation hung in the air like smoke, and I knew that whatever happened next, there was no going back from this moment. I'd just burned the bridge I'd spent my whole life trying to build, and it felt like revenge and justice wrapped into one terrifying, liberating act. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife when a voice I didn't recognize broke through the silence. "Excuse me, but what exactly is happening here?" I turned to see an older woman in an elegant navy gown, diamonds at her throat, her posture radiating the kind of authority that comes from generations of wealth and social power. My mother's face did something I'd never seen before. She looked genuinely afraid. "Mrs. Whitmore," she stammered, her voice losing all its earlier venom. "This is just a family misunderstanding. Nothing to concern yourself with." "I'm already concerned," Eleanor Whitmore interrupted, her sharp eyes moving from my mother to me, to the envelope clutched in my hands. "I've been watching this young woman stand outside in the courtyard all evening, and I couldn't help but notice her badge. The bride's sister, relegated to limited access?" Eleanor Whitmore was Maxwell's grandmother, and apparently a legend in their social circle. Old money, philanthropist, the kind of woman whose approval could make or break your standing in these circles. She looked at my gray badge like it was a personal insult to decency itself. "I've attended hundreds of weddings in my 82 years, she said, her voice carrying across the pavilion, "and I've never witnessed a family treat their own daughter this way. Separate badges? Denied meals?" She turned to my mother with an expression of such profound disappointment that I watched my mother physically shrink. "Is this how you raise your children, Mrs. Morrison? To value some and discard others like they're inconvenient expenses?" The shocking thing wasn't just that someone was finally calling it out. It was that it was someone my parents couldn't dismiss or silence. My father tried to salvage the situation with his corporate smile, the one he used in boardrooms when deals went south. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're misunderstanding the situation. Kimberly has always been difficult. This was a practical decision about managing—" "Managing what?" Eleanor cut him off, her voice like ice. "Managing basic human decency? I heard what this young woman just said. I saw the photos on her phone. You planned to take her money while treating her like an unwanted guest at her own sister's wedding." She looked around at the crowd that had gathered, witnesses to this unraveling. "Is this the kind of family my grandson is marrying into? One that operates on betrayal and exploitation disguised as practicality?" The power shift in that room was palpable, like watching a tide change. Suddenly, my parents weren't the respected, wealthy family hosting a glamorous wedding. They were exposed, their cruelty on display for everyone who mattered in their social world to judge. Guests were whispering furiously now, and I caught fragments. "Can you believe? Her own sister. $15,000. The narrative they'd controlled so carefully was slipping through their fingers like water, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. My mother's face had gone from white to red to a kind of gray that matched my badge, and I realized I was watching her worst nightmare unfold. Public shame, loss of reputation, judgment from the very people she'd spent decades impressing. Eleanor turned to me, her expression softening. "Dear, what's your name?" "Kimberly," I managed, my voice barely steady. "Kimberly Morrison." She nodded like she was filing it away. "Kimberly, I want you to know that what I've witnessed here is not a reflection of your worth, but of their character. A family that would orchestrate this level of humiliation while expecting financial contribution isn't practicing love. They're practicing exploitation." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and I watched my mother's eyes fill with tears of rage and shame. "Mrs. Morrison," Eleanor continued, turning back to my mother, "you should be ashamed. Truly, deeply ashamed. And if this is how you treat family, I question what values my grandson is marrying into." The confrontation had evolved beyond me taking back my envelope. It had become a public trial with an authority figure I didn't even know acting as judge and jury. Maxwell's parents appeared, looking mortified, clearly trying to manage the fallout of their mother's very public condemnation of the bride's family. Natalie emerged from wherever she'd been, her face confused and angry, probably wondering why her perfect day was imploding. But Eleanor Whitmore wasn't done. "In my world," she said, addressing the crowd now, "we measure a family's worth not by their wealth or their connections, but by how they treat the most vulnerable among them. What I've seen tonight is a shocking failure of basic morality." She looked at me one more time, gave a small nod of solidarity, and walked away, leaving my parents standing in the wreckage of their reputation, while I stood there with my envelope, witnesses everywhere, and the sudden, surreal realization that justice doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from truth spoken by someone the oppressors can't silence. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't apologize. I didn't do any of the things the old Kimberly would have done, the version of me who would have melted under the pressure, handed over the money, and apologized for existing. Instead, I turned on my heel, envelope still clutched in my hand, and walked toward the exit with my head held higher than it had been in years. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice rising in pitch. "Kimberly! Kimberly, get back here right now!" But I kept walking, past the shocked guests, past the security guard who looked relieved he wouldn't have to physically intervene, past the elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than my car. Each step felt like shedding weight I'd been carrying since childhood, and by the time I reached the estate's main gates, I was practically floating. I called an Uber, and while I waited under the enormous stone archway with Ashford Estate carved into it, my phone started exploding. My mother called 6 times in 3 minutes, then my father, then Natalie, her voice shrill through voicemail. "How could you do this to me? On my wedding day? You're so selfish." I listened to that message twice, marveling at the audacity. I was selfish for refusing to be exploited, but they weren't selfish for planning my humiliation down to the last detail. My father's voicemail was more calculated, his corporate negotiation voice. "Kimberly, let's be adults about this. Come back, we'll talk, we'll work this out. Don't throw away your family over a misunderstanding." But I'd seen the emails, the crossed-out seating chart, the text messages. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exactly what they'd intended, and they were just upset I'd refused to follow the script. My Uber arrived, a beat-up Toyota driven by a guy named Luis who took one look at my face and said, "Rough night?" I laughed, and it came out slightly unhinged. "You could say that. I just blew up my sister's wedding." He raised his eyebrows but didn't pry, just pulled away from the estate as my phone continued its frantic symphony of notifications. Through the rear window, I saw the same black SUV behind us at 2 different turns, and my heart started racing. My family wasn't just calling, they were actually following me. "Hey," I told Luis, "I think someone's following us. Can you take a different route?" He glanced in the rearview mirror, and his expression shifted from casual to concerned. "No problem, I know these streets." He took several unexpected turns through residential areas, and we eventually lost them somewhere in the hills. The next 20 minutes felt surreal as my phone cycled through every family member they could recruit to their cause. My aunt called, "Kimberly, your mother is hysterical. Whatever happened, just come back and apologize." My cousin texted, "This is so embarrassing for everyone, just fix it." Then Maxwell's mother called, and her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Miss Morrison, you've caused a significant disruption to my son's wedding. The least you could do is return and allow us to salvage the evening." She wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling to protect optics, to manage the disaster my truth-telling had created for their perfectly curated event. The audacity was breathtaking. I'd been treated like garbage all night, but I was the one who needed to apologize, to fix things, to make everyone else comfortable with their own cruelty. Luis finally dropped me at my apartment building with a sympathetic nod and the words, "Whatever you did back there, I hope it was worth it." I stood on the sidewalk, my phone now showing 43 missed calls and God knows how many texts, and I realized it absolutely was worth it. The old Kimberly would have crumbled under this pressure, would have convinced herself that keeping the peace was more important than keeping her self-worth. But something fundamental had shifted when I picked up that envelope. I'd chosen myself, maybe for the first time in my life, and there was no going back from that. I turned my phone to silent, walked into my tiny apartment that suddenly felt more like home than that estate ever could, and let myself breathe. The calls and texts continued for hours, each one more desperate than the last. My mother's messages evolved from angry, "How dare you humiliate us?" to manipulative, "After everything we've done for you," to almost pleading, "Just come back tomorrow, we'll talk, please don't do this to the family." My father sent an email at 11 p.m. with the subject line, "Family meeting required." Like this was a corporate crisis that could be managed with a PowerPoint presentation. Natalie's messages were pure venom. "You're dead to me," followed by, "Mom is crying because of you," followed by, "I hope you're happy ruining my wedding." But the message that really crystallized everything came from my mother at midnight. "We still expect you to contribute to the wedding costs. You made a commitment. That money isn't about tonight. It's about family responsibility." And there it was, the truth stripped of all pretense. They still wanted the money, even after everything, because in their minds, I owed them for the privilege of being backstabbed. I read that message 3 times, screenshot it for my records, and then blocked every single one of them. The karma they'd been building for years had finally come due, and I wasn't going to finance their recovery from it. Monday morning, I walked into my bank with that envelope still sealed, the cashier's check inside untouched. I voided it immediately and moved every single dollar from my old savings account into a new account in my name only. No emergency contacts, no beneficiaries from my family, just me. The teller, a young woman named Lisa, processed everything without questions, but I saw her glance at the amount, $15,000 being reclaimed, and then at my face. "Starting fresh?" she asked gently. "Yeah," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "I'm investing it in someone who actually deserves it. Me." I walked out of that bank with a new cashier's check made out to myself, and it felt like I'd just won a lawsuit against my own trauma. The $15,000 that was supposed to buy my way into a family that never wanted me was now going to build a life they couldn't touch. The fallout from the wedding spread through our extended family like wildfire, but the narrative depended entirely on who was telling it. My parents' version painted me as unstable, jealous, and vindictive, a daughter who'd ruined her sister's perfect day out of spite. But Eleanor Whitmore's presence at my public confrontation had created cracks in their story that they couldn't patch. People had seen the photos on my phone, heard her condemnation, witnessed my mother's face when the truth came out. My Aunt Diane, my father's sister who'd always been kind to me, called on Tuesday. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew they treated you differently, but I didn't realize it was this calculated. I'm so sorry, Kimberly. I should have said something years ago." Her validation felt like oxygen after years of being gaslight. Wednesday brought an unexpected twist that felt almost cosmically timed. I got the promotion I'd been working toward for 18 months. My boss called me into her office and offered me the senior nurse position with a $20,000 salary increase and a leadership role I'd earned through pure competence and dedication. "You've been the backbone of this unit," she told me, completely unaware that I was barely holding myself together after the most intense weekend of my life. I accepted, thanked her professionally, and then went to my car and cried for 20 minutes. Not from sadness, but from the shocking realization that the universe had just confirmed what I'd always suspected. My worth had nothing to do with my family's opinion of me. I'd been building value in my own life while they were busy trying to convince me I had none. By Friday, I'd made 3 major decisions that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. First, I put a deposit on a better apartment across town, one with actual heat and a kitchen that didn't make me depressed just looking at it. Second, I booked a 2-week trip to Portugal, something I'd dreamed about for years, but always dismissed as too expensive or too selfish. Third, I started drafting a message to my family, not because I owed them an explanation, but because I needed to articulate my boundaries for myself as much as for them. The message went through 17 drafts over 3 days, each version getting clearer and more firm until I finally had something that felt true. A declaration of independence that didn't apologize for existing. I sent the message on Sunday, exactly 1 week after the wedding, through email so there'd be a record, and so they couldn't interrupt or manipulate in real time. "I'm writing to establish clear boundaries moving forward," it began. "I will no longer accept crumbs from a table where I'm not welcome. I will no longer finance my own humiliation or pay for the privilege of being treated as less than. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect, love, and basic human dignity. For 32 years, I tried to earn something you should have given freely. I performed, sacrificed, and diminished myself trying to fit into a space you never intended to make for me. That ends now." I outlined specific terms. No contact until they could acknowledge the harm they'd caused. No guilt trips about family loyalty. No expectations of my time, money, or emotional labor. I'm not asking for an apology because I don't believe you think you did anything wrong. I'm simply informing you that I'm no longer available to play the role of scapegoat in your family drama. I choose dignity over dysfunction and self-worth over your approval. The responses came within hours, predictable in their patterns. My mother's was angry and defensive, full of accusations about my mental state and overreactions. My father's was legalistic, treating my boundaries like contract negotiations he could argue his way out of. Natalie's was pure betrayal. "After everything Mom and Dad did for you, this is how you repay them? You're not my sister anymore." But mixed in with the expected reactions were surprising ones. My Aunt Diane saying she was proud of me. 2 cousins admitting they'd witnessed the mistreatment for years. Even Sophie, the wedding coordinator, reaching out to say she'd quit her job because watching my family operate had made her rethink her career in an industry that enabled such cruelty. The truth was spreading beyond my family's ability to control it, and while they scrambled to manage their reputation, I was finally, truly free. I wasn't waiting for karma or revenge or justice from some external source anymore. I'd reclaimed it myself, one boundary at a time, and the life I was building without them was the best payback I could have designed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't staying at the table demanding to be fed. It's walking away and realizing you were never hungry for their scraps in the first place. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever been the gray badge in your own family? Have you ever paid financially, emotionally, spiritually, for a seat at a table where you weren't actually welcome? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I know I'm not alone in this. Maybe you're the scapegoat who finally walked away, or maybe you're still sitting in that courtyard wondering if you're crazy for feeling invisible. Maybe you've been Natalie, the golden child who never questioned why your sibling was treated like a stranger at family events. I want to hear it all. The messy, uncomfortable truth about what happens when family becomes the source of your deepest betrayal instead of your safest place. And here's the question that keeps me up at night. At what point do you stop fighting for scraps and start building your own table? When do you give yourself permission to say enough without guilt, without shame, without waiting for them to finally see your worth? Comment below if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity. Because that's the real question nobody wants to ask at family gatherings. Tell me, have you ever taken back your envelope, literally or metaphorically? Have you ever canceled the check you'd been writing your whole life to people who kept cashing it without ever saying thank you? Drop your thoughts, your experiences, your anger, your liberation stories in the comments. Let's build a community of people who understand that self-worth isn't negotiable and that family, real family, doesn't require you to shrink yourself to fit their narrative. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt seen in these words, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because I'm going to keep bringing you stories that expose the dynamics we're taught to accept as normal, the patterns we're conditioned to excuse as just how families are. This channel is for everyone who's ever been made to feel like the problem for refusing to be treated like less than they deserve. Subscribe now because the conversations we're having here, they're the ones your family doesn't want you to have. And that's exactly why they're so necessary.